Hello, welcome to another PC Gamer hardware discussion, and we're talking about the AMD graphics card launch that happened just yesterday. It's the AMD RX 6800 series launch. I'm Dave, the PC Gamer person.
That's very accurate.
Yeah, I'm a PC Gamer person, yeah.
And I'm Jacob, senior hardware editor at PC Gamer.
No, so we are going to do the title thing. Fine, it's all right. We like.
To be fair, I thought you were. Yeah,
it's all right. No one needs to know my title. It's kind of spurious anyway.
King of hardware.
Yeah.
So yesterday obviously had the release of the 6800 and 6800 XT, but not the 16900 XT, which is coming December 8th. So you have that to look forward to.
Big Navi.
That's the real big Navi. But that's not to say that the 6800 and 6800 XT are little Navi in any sense. They're also fairly big Navi too. But unfortunately, maybe not big in inventory. And that's kind of the hot topic at the moment, is the fact that much like the 30 series from NVIDIA, they've been very tough to track down, and stock kind of dissipated almost minutes after release.
That's kind of the thing. We have to acknowledge like the vanished elephant in the room, just like the complete lack of stock. But this is a peculiarly 2020 issue, really, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not something that's solely affecting AMD. It's something that's affecting, even beyond gaming, beyond PC parts. It's just something it's just impossible to track down a lot of tech at the moment. But it's still an important topic to talk about. It's the fact that these graphics cards, however great they are almost impossible to find, and potentially will be until January, February next year. I mean, it's impossible to say at the moment because we haven't got any official kind of word on supply from AMD. But I think judging by the fact that NVIDIA are not seeing stock likely to return until that time, I think we could probably assume a similar kind of trickle.
I mean, it's like obviously we don't want that to overshadow what are particularly impressive graphics cards, which we'll come to in a minute. But I mean, I think the tough thing is that like we had AMD execs crowing quite considerably about the Ampere launch and how the AMD graphics card launch wouldn't be the same. And I mean, it was arguably worse. We didn't even see stock appear.
But like you say, it doesn't take away from the fact that they are actually like superb graphics cards. So I've been reviewing both the 6800 and the 6800 XT over the past few weeks. The 6800 XT, for one, start with that, kind of aimed squarely at the RTX 3080, but for slightly cheaper, 72 CU card that quite easily breaks 2 gigahertz, which I don't think is like any small accomplishment, really. Like, we're talking about cards that like not just go boost into 2 gigahertz, they just sit there for pretty much the entire time that you're gaming on them, which is kind of mad.
Yeah, we've seen NVIDIA cards sort of like bouncing around the 2 gig mark, but like only really briefly and generally sort of like overclocked. Whereas like AMD have just like made this somewhere that they live almost.
So the AMD engineers have been kind of talking about that. They have the unfortunately named CAC optimizations, which is capacitance alternating current optimizations that they've put in for the transistors, which they say has added a huge boost to the ability to kind of clock these cards higher while keeping them at a steady TGP. So that's kind of helped a lot. They've also brought over a lot of I think this is one of the more important things for the RDNA 2 architecture, is the way that they've worked with the Zen teams to then integrate what they've learned, through 3 major iterations of the Zen architecture for their Ryzen chips. All that power optimization, the 7nm library.
So that's bringing over like all the learnings that they had when they've been putting together these processors in a completely separate team. But for the first time, they're sort of like properly integrating these teams together and just taking silicon learnings that they found from these CPUs and bringing it into GPU design as well.
It's definitely one of the things that AMD wants to highlight a lot. I think it's one of the biggest things that I focus on in my review as well, is one of the main things they've taken over from the EPYC server CPUs is the idea of a massive cache that's like on the die, and I mean massive in comparison to the kind of L1, L2 caches you normally have on these chips, and the infinity cache on the GPU. There's this huge block just kind of surrounding the die. Well, not surrounding; it's just off to one side, but it's a pretty large part of the die, kind of sitting alongside the 256-bit memory bus to help increase memory bandwidth. And it definitely feels like that's kind of AMD's ace in the hole with this architecture, where they're saying, hey, we don't need to do this huge 512-bit memory bus. That's super demanding. It's going to suck loads of power. Instead, let's use this infinity cache. And 60 to 80% of the time, you're going to get a hit on it, and it's going to just massively help.
What else has actually changed? Because obviously this is still essentially the Navi architecture that we saw introduced with the 5700. Like what is different from the 5000 series to the 6000 series, aside from the Infinity Cache side?
So obviously, yeah, Infinity Cache, you've got the power optimizations. Probably one of the bigger name things for gaming, or at least one of the like things that hits the biggest buzzword, is the ray accelerators, which are the hardware accelerated ray tracing blocks, which are within every compute unit. There's still the same. There's a lot of similarities between RDNA and RDNA2, and the same dual compute unit is being used. So you'll see that the actual block diagram of the GPU looks fairly similar, apart from the addition of the cache. But you also see the 2 ray accelerators per dual compute unit, and that's basically AMD's answer to NVIDIA's RT Core and Tensor Core combo, which is in the Turing architecture is introduced, and now obviously worked upon with the Ampere architecture.
How do we think that's going to match up with what NVIDIA is doing on the ray tracing side of things? Because obviously they've got a whole lot more logic dropped into their chips.
Yeah, you're definitely seeing 2 very different approaches. Even if you just look at it from a GPU diagram, like the way that they're kind of incorporating them in is very different. And the fact that NVIDIA is also bringing in, I think the best way to explain it is you've got the 3 kind of major stages of the ray tracing. And for the most part, they're accelerating the intersection of the BVH structure, which is the bounding volume hierarchy structure, which is kind of like the boxes within boxes system. And AMD is accelerating that using its new ray accelerators, which is similar to how NVIDIA approaches it with its RT cores. They're accelerating that bit. But then at the end of the ray tracing kind of equation, you've also got the denoising section. Obviously, that's something that the Tensor Core takes care of, the AI kind of acceleration on the NVIDIA chip. And it's not something that AMD's actually built in any specific hardware for. So they're running all of that on the just on the compute units, just on the regular kind of, it's just a shader code on that. So you're seeing 2 kind of slightly different approaches with it. And in our testing, it definitely feels like the NVIDIA one has been fine-tuned just that little bit more. And I think they're putting a little bit more weight behind their ray tracing kind of solution, because AMD's is getting it done, and like they promised they wanted to get it done at 1440p, and it does feel like they are kind of offering, you can turn ray tracing on, but it doesn't feel like quite with Ampere we saw them negate the impact of ray tracing, so that you could turn it on, you'd have DLSS and everything, you could turn all this stuff on, and you wouldn't see a huge significant drop in frames anymore. You're not quite seeing that with AMD. It's more like we saw with Turing, where it's still kind of like hitting your performance a bit more.
So it very much feels like sort of like first gen.
Yeah, 100%. And like maybe it was a lot to ask for AMD to not only come back 4K gaming performance at the high end next to the 3080, and also have created this brand new ray accelerator that's also going to match. And it's a great solution. It gets the job done. It means you can turn it on, and it means we'll probably see ray tracing adoption increased across games, because they know that basically no matter what hardware it is, as long as it's new, it's going to support it. It's great for the industry no matter what.
Because I mean, that's the key thing, isn't it? It's like they're not introducing a whole new like way of ray tracing. This is still all based on Microsoft's DXR, it's DirectX ray tracing API. So it's all essentially doing the same thing, but they're just accelerating different parts of it to use that API in a more performant way. I was just thinking, to a certain extent, it's kind of dependent on how much game developers take that on board in terms of the next gen consoles. And in the Xbox Series X runs a version of DirectX 12. It has its own like a similar version of DirectX ray tracing. So it's going to be a similar sort of like ecosystem across. Obviously, that's based on AMD hardware as well. So like across that whole swathe of gaming hardware, there's a huge ray tracing ecosystem potentially there.
I think AMD are probably banking a little bit on the fact that in the future there's going to be a little bit more optimization for their hardware, specifically not just RDNA, but also Zen CPUs, because you're seeing both next-gen consoles built with Zen CPUs and RDNA architecture, RDNA 2, Zen 2, and now you've got all of that in the PC as well. At least they're hoping that developers are going to be slightly more kind of attuned to the needs of what AMD prefers. So you might get a little bit more performance out in the long run. I don't know how that's actually going to play out. There's definitely some hope for it with the consoles on such comparative hardware to PCs.
Yeah, I mean we've spoken a lot about ray tracing here. And obviously it's the big pretty, it's the big shiny. But realistically, it's for the vast majority of us, we just want to know like how it deals with standard gaming performance and standard rasterization. How is the 6800 XT? How does it perform against the RTX 3080? Where does it stand?
I mean, that's the key battle here, and I think that's probably the biggest question that everyone had before the launch of these cards. And at 4K, like you're seeing performance very close to the RTX 3080, if not matching it. In very rare occasions, surpassing it. It really depends on the game. I think there is quite a wide spread on how it performs, but genuinely, it does sit very close to the 3080. And we barely actually mentioned the cost of these cards, but at $649 for the 6800 XT to the RTX 3080 $699, it's slightly cheaper and offers, I'd say, like as a 4K experience, a 4K gaming card, near enough the exact same level of performance. It's definitely like 4K performance, fantastic. 1440p performance is amazing as well. But I think specifically that's where the 6800 shines. It's a great 4K card, just as capable as any other from the last generation. You can compare the 6800 to the 2080 Ti and see it coming out on top, which is crazy, really, when you think about it.
I mean, this is the thing. So we've got two in the 3070 and the 6800. We've got two third-tier graphics cards, which are either matching or outperforming the absolute pinnacle of the last generation, and that's kind of an unprecedented generational leap from both camps. Obviously, the 6800 is actually like it's performing faster than both the 3070 and the 2800 the 2080 Ti.
Yeah, so the 3070 is a funny one as well. So the 6800 is topping both of those cards at that level because it doesn't really match up. The 3070, maybe the smaller memory pool, isn't quite matching the 2080 Ti in every game. Like I said before, with the memory kind of demands of certain games being quite variable. But then the 6800 is confidently above both of those cards, no matter what. It's a more difficult card to judge where it is because it doesn't really have a direct counterpart in NVIDIA's stack.
It's a lot more expensive, isn't it, than the 3070?
Yeah, so it's $579 in US dollars, and the 3070 is $499. And so it's it's $80 more, and yeah, it beats it. And I think, but at that price, of course it should. But then the 6800 XT is only $70 more than that. And I think if you're looking at a 3070, looking at $80 more for the 6800 and then another 70, like that's way out of your price bracket. But if you're looking at a 6800, are you not going to be going, well, for $70 more, I could get like a significant uplift in performance over what the 6800 can offer?
That was the thing that really stood out to me about the 6800. And it was just like, I mean, I know you were struggling to do the mental arithmetic then, but the 6800 XT is $150 more expensive than the 3070, well. and that is a big jump in price. So you can see like the 3070 and the 6800 XT are very, very far apart. With the 6800s slotting in between those two cards, like you can't. I struggled to see why you would buy the 6800 if you wanted to get a $500 card, which is still a huge amount of money. I'm still struggling with that, but then I've been struggling with that for years. Still, if that's your limit, then the 3070 is a great option. $70 more for the 6800, but then like if you're gonna spend
nearly $600,
then you might as well get the XT. Traditionally, like whenever like AMD has always released its new graphics cards in this sort of like rule of two type thing. It's like they've always had a high-end card and then a slightly like chopped down version.
Yeah, the 5700 XT and the 5700.
Yeah, and in that stance, it was like there was a price difference and there was a performance difference, but it was still it was both in both counts. It was very close. Whereas this time, price-wise, it's relatively close, but for performance, it's vastly superior. The 6800 XT is vastly superior to the 6800, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. And like, I think that also touches on something that we haven't seen yet, but come December 8th, the 8 CU difference from 72 with the 6800 XT to the 6900 XT, there's 8 CUs between it, and that's a slimmer gap than between the 6800 and the 6800 XT. So it's going to be interesting how that plays out, because we're talking a 649 card to a 999 card, and for 8 CUs, and same TDP, same memory, a very similar configuration, even the same clock speeds. That's going to be interesting to see how that one shakes out, because we know that the RTX 3080 is so close to the RTX 3090 in a lot of gaming workloads, and it's kind of been touted as, oh, maybe it's more for creative applications.
Yeah, that is not a gaming card. I mean, that's the thing. We've played around with the 3090, and it's like, obviously, like it's the most powerful graphics card out there. But I mean, you like, there's no point buying one. It's so much more expensive than a 3080 that and the performance delta is so small that I don't understand why you would buy a 3090 just for gaming. And I think that's what worries me about the 6900 XT versus the 6800 XT. I can't see the performance delta being big enough to warrant that $1,000 card.
Yeah, absolutely. It's still so much more money to spend, and we don't know what Nvidia's response to all this is, but there's so much wiggle room at the moment still left in the stack. We know how these generational things end up being, even when AMD's not been that competitive in the high end. Nvidia's stack of graphics cards, by the time it's done with releasing a TI, a Super here, it's so full. There's no gap that they've not covered with something, and there's so much room for shaping things up to kind of compete with AMD here, and then AMD will compete with them there. I think we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg of this whole stack at the moment.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like, once the 6900 XT comes out, I can't believe that we won't see $1,000 Nvidia card. I just like, there's such a price gap for Nvidia to sort of like slot into at that point.
I know obviously a 3080 Ti is kind of proposed at the moment. It's not been confirmed. Nothing's been confirmed of any of these cards at the moment. But how would that fit if you got a 20 gigabyte card that's basically a 3080 with 20 gigabyte? Surely in the games where the 3090 was ahead, that memory buffer maybe came in handy. Is this just going to completely destroy it? I don't know. Is it going to be worth it? Probably not. The 3090, was it ever worth it? Probably not. Did it stop them probably selling everyone and us all wanting them? It's just a thing that you can put up on a shelf and go, hey, look what I've got. So, there's always going to be a demand for that.
Essentially, you've got all the high-end, like 6900 XT aside, we've got all the high-end cards out there right now. So you've got the 3070, 3080, 3090, 6800, 6800 XT. What do you buy? What's the card that what's the card that you want?
I still think if I were to go, so if budget really was no concern, it would still be an RTX 3080, and I think and budget no concern is maybe a really unfair way of looking at it, but it offers the best. And the other thing is that it offers the better ray tracing and DLSS performance on top of that. And we're seeing DLSS, if you don't play major AAA games, then perhaps it's not for you, but a lot of major AAA games now are coming with it, and it does seem to significantly improve the frame rates. And in my experience, it's very hard to discern between a DLSS super sampled scene and a non-super sampled scene at like a native resolution. So I would, if I had $600+ to spend, it would still be the 3080, even though the XT I still think is a fantastic graphics card. The 6800 versus the 3070, still such an impossible task to match them up because they're not really a match. I'd probably, if I was just playing at 1440p, right in the sweet spot, PC gaming sweet spot, and I still hold that it is the sweet spot for now, 1440p, 144 hertz, or even 165 hertz maybe, then the 6800 is probably my choice there, just because I think it just absolutely just rules that resolution and offers the best kind of just smooth game experience with just what you want on. But if you're really looking around $500, I don't know. I still really struggle. It's an internal debate.
But I think that's quite nice, though. It's like we're at a point where it's actually quite a difficult choice to make, which is something that hasn't been there for a while. It has been kind of like an automatic, oh, well, you buy these because it's the most performant. Whereas now there is this debate, isn't there?
Yeah. Before you'd maybe make the argument that if you got an AMD card, you'd see it not as second tier, but you might have to make a compromise in a way or two. I think that is almost nearly entirely gone. Ray tracing might be the only exception to the rule, but for the most part, like for just rasterized gaming performance, 4K, they're fantastic. Whichever card you buy that's competing at that 4K mark is fantastic right now. And they're all on the highest end of our review scale. All of them set up. There's not been a single they've not whiffed it on a single card this generation, to be honest. I think that's fantastic.
And I think that's the thing, the generational leap, whichever GPU you're going for, whichever manufacturer you're going for, the generational leap this time around has been pretty unprecedented, and I think that's really exciting for any PC gamer.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks for your time, Jacob. Thanks for all your efforts benchmarking the hell out of those cards.
Yeah. Thanks for having me in my own bedroom.
Excellent.